like allowed to drive if it were obviously our car, but just we
Sure,
are in
but
like different states.
everyone's mic should be on mute. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. Thrilled to be here on a Friday afternoon. Very excited about our guest today, which is U.S. Congressman Conor Lamb. I'm very excited to have a chance to talk with him. And a couple of things. First of all, we have a couple of organizations that have just been amazing for us. And one is Huntington Bank. Huntington Bank has been a sponsor of ours right from the beginning. They are one of the largest SBA lenders. They have been so busy with PPP. And on top of that, they've just been incredible partners all across the tech ecosystem. So I want to thank them. Also want to thank AT&T, who continues to be our partner as we have a government series to business, and they've just been terrific in terms of partnership and helping all through COVID. Just making sure that people get the tools that they need so that they can be connected, and they've just really stepped up. So really appreciate AT&T. And then there's 40 by 80, which is the wholly owned subsidiary of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. And that's where we focus on things such as workforce development. Soon you'll hear about apprenticeship and entrepreneurship. So that's our 501c3. So I want to just remind everyone, and a couple of people didn't have their mics on mute, or we had some sort of glitch. Mics are on mute. We've done that on purpose. And we have a chat. And the chat's going to be monitored by Jonathan Kirsting. He is here. He's Vice President of all things media and marketing for the Tech Council. So I'm going to jump in right now and welcome Congressman Conor Lamb. I'm thrilled to have you. I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you today. And before we start, first of all, this is the second time you've been with us. We've been doing this daily series for 11 months now. Congressman, it's hard to believe. The last time you were on, the world was a little bit different. And we're very excited to have a chance to talk to you. So welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me back. And yeah, the world seems to always be changing, at least politically. Every time I think we've reached the craziest point in the journey, something else unpredictable happens. So
no, it's amazing. But before we start, can we just take a quick, just a few minutes just to talk about your background before you ran for Congress, and just tell us a little bit about your district.
Sure. I grew up here in Mount Lebanon, where I'm talking from now, and went to Catholic school my whole childhood, Central Catholic High School, went out to college and law school at Penn in Philadelphia, and then joined the Marine Corps after I graduated from law school. So I was a military lawyer, mostly a prosecutor in rape and sexual assault cases, which are unfortunately a pretty big problem in the military. Got a lot of trial experience doing that. And when I came off of active duty, I became a federal prosecutor back home here in Pittsburgh, stayed in the Marine Corps Reserves. And when I was here in Pittsburgh, Dave Hickton was the U.S. attorney. We had a big push against the opioid epidemic. And I prosecuted a lot of heroin trafficking cases, some corrupt doctors who were giving out the painkillers that often lead to heroin overdoses, as well as some other things, bank robberies and violent crime. And that was what I was doing when I decided to quit and run for Congress in late 2017. So happy to talk more about that, but that's where I come from.
Right. No, it's great. And, so we're glad to have you here. And the impetus for you to run?
I think that for me, first of all, President Trump's arrival in politics and the fact that he did so well, not only in Pennsylvania, but in Western Pennsylvania, was kind of a wake-up call for someone like me who was from a family of Democrats, people active in politics. And at the same time that was happening, I was working these cases where people were overdosing on heroin, and it was really hollowing out communities all over our area in Washington County, Fayette County, Greene County, all these places kind of outside of the city of Pittsburgh, where you could just tell they weren't doing as well as they were 20 or 30 years ago. And neither party was fully to blame. I'd say both parties are to blame in their policy failures over that period of time. And the more I worked these cases, I started thinking to myself, there's much bigger issues at play here involving, how we build and protect the middle class and trade and wages, and just culture. And I wanted to be part of that, and I felt like running for Congress might give me a chance to help.
And so talk about your area, who you represent. What are the regions? What are the counties?
Yeah, I've had 2 districts in the short time that I've been in, but the district that I represent right now, you can think of it as kind of where I live in Mount Lebanon, this portion of the South Hills, heading west to the airport, never going into the city, but hugging the city all around. So I have like, Green Tree and Crafton and McKees Rocks and those places that are right up against the city, out to the airport. And then in Allegheny County, wrapping around through Sewickley, all through the North Hills, and out as far as like Natrona Heights up in the Allegheny Valley. And then I have all of Beaver County, and I have half of Cranberry. So it's kind of this thing that is west and north mostly of the city up against the Ohio-West Virginia border.
So a very diverse community as well.
Yes.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the, in terms of the next stimulus package. What's going on? Can we talk about where the discussions are right now? What are your personal priorities for the package?
Sure. And one, if I could just kind of make a point about word choice, it's important to us that the emphasis in this package actually is not as much on stimulus as people tend to say. We really view this as much more like a disaster relief plan, like a rescue plan. That's what Biden officially calls it. So there are some stimulative parts of it, like the $1,400 checks. But even those we view as somewhat backward looking, of trying to help these families that have lost so much throughout the year and that are going deeper and deeper into debt for various reasons. So that's a big piece of it, is helping people with cash payments as quickly as we can get it, like you would in a disaster. Extending the unemployment benefits. What we've seen over the year is that a lot of people lost their jobs right away. A lot of them got them back within a few months, depending on what they do. And there's a group of long-term unemployed where it is really just stuck. And those are, it's hotels, it's restaurants, it's anyone related to like travel. It's certain key industries, tourism, entertainment, that we all know why they can't be in business. And those people are skilled at their jobs and have just been long-term unemployed. And so we need to make sure we keep helping them. There's a lot in the bill related to improving the vaccine rollout, and even investing in the research for the booster vaccines that we'll probably need for different variants. Investing in how to reach harder to reach communities, like in rural areas or in inner city areas where people might be skeptical of vaccines. That actually costs time and money to do. And then the last big piece I would emphasize that's unique is direct federal aid to our state and local governments. We haven't really done that up to this point. We've conditioned some very specific coronavirus relief to them. But the state of Pennsylvania, for example, had about a $4 billion budget shortfall last year because they weren't collecting as much gas tax, tolls, all the stuff that the state collects that just slowed down during the pandemic. And that really, when you think about that, the lesson, I guess, that they've told us after 2008 was state and local governments employ a lot of people. They just have a lot of employees. They contract with the firms that go out and do all the road and bridge and sewer work and stuff. And when they run out of money, they start laying people off or they stop hiring people. It's just what they have to do. And so this money not only helps us respond to COVID, it helps the unemployment problem from getting any worse and affecting, cops, teachers, the people who make this place work every day.
So along the lines of, let's talk about return to work and economic inclusion. The House recently passed the National Apprenticeship Act with your help and with your leadership. And we at the Tech Council and the tech community, we're particularly bullish on apprenticeships. So talk about the components of that the act and why you're so supportive of it. And also talk about the amendment that you successfully offered to help improve for the final bill. So this is the first time in a long time we're talking about this stuff at the federal level.
Great. Yeah. What I like about this bill is that it takes an existing program, an existing idea that has been extremely successful and just sort of builds on it or doubles down on it. So often I think we get stuck in politics in these debates between like the kind of far out, very liberal or progressive types who want to reinvent everything and like big and bold is their term and do all these new ideas that haven't quite been tested. or like extremely hardcore small government types who want to just sort of cut and stop everything. And my position tends to be more, some people describe it as in the middle. I would say it more has to do with, let's look at what has worked and reinvest in that, and look at what has not worked, no matter how well intentioned, and not do as much of that. This is a great example of looking at something, the Federal Registered Apprenticeship Program, which has been around since FDR, and just expanding it. So, it provides federal funding for on-the-job apprenticeship training. If you can think about it, small, even medium-sized businesses might have a hard time paying for that type of training for someone that has no skills, but they need the training to happen because they're, if you're a pipe fitter, for example, that's a very advanced trade. You have to spend some time learning it. Who's going to pay for it? So this program helps that investment become possible. And what this bill did was put a whole lot of additional money behind it so that we can do more and expand the industries in which these types of apprenticeships take place. And technology is a great example of where we need a lot of people who, probably don't need that bachelor's degree, but need more than they get coming out of high school. And there's also fun stuff like winemaking, tree trimming, senior care is one of the areas where it's one of the fastest growing jobs in America, and we want to see more of an apprenticeship model in there. So it's expanding access by having more people in more professions, and that should help people from having to take on too much student debt. It gets them into the workforce faster, earning more money. It's just a win-win. It had a huge bipartisan support as a result.
And so anything about the amendment?
Sure. Yeah, I
that's
did.
in there?
I had some amendments related to veterans' access to apprenticeships. So like a lot of government programs, like this vaccine, for example, a lot of people want it. Not everybody knows how to get it. So you always have to put in some resources for the kind of outreach and marketing. And we did that by bringing what they call VSOs, which are like the American Legion, Wounded Warrior, those traditional veterans organizations, bringing them into this process of recruiting people for apprenticeships, basically.
So there's a couple of questions in there. I don't know if Jonathan, you want to look at them?
Absolutely. Let's start with Sherry Vach here. Wants to know, says two questions from her actually. Are you doing anything to try to get the Keystone Pipeline reopened and get everyone who is laid off their jobs back? And number two, her mother is soon to be 93 and has not been able to get her vaccine appointment. Do you anticipate more availability soon?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for the question. So Keystone Pipeline, I talked to a number of the trade unions about this, and I was sort of on their side of it, that I wouldn't have handled it the way that President Biden did in terms of kind of first day executive order cancellation type of thing. That being said, he said during the campaign he was going to do that, and so when I reached out to the White House on behalf of working people who were interested in this, their response was, "Look, we said we're doing it in the campaign. We're keeping our word." And so I don't think there's, unfortunately, going to be reconsideration of that under this president. I do want to make the point, though, that is important for Western Pennsylvanians to understand, which is that the Keystone Pipeline way out there in Montana, the Dakotas, Midwest, wherever, it did not have a huge energy or jobs implication for Western Pennsylvania, at least at this stage. We think there were around 1,000 people working on it at that time, and I didn't want them to lose their job. I wouldn't want them to lose their job. But many of the numbers that you've heard about, 10,000 people working on the pipeline, for example, were seasonal construction jobs building the pipeline. And I believe that if we work hard enough on getting the vaccine done, rebuilding the economy, doing a big public infrastructure program, that most of those construction workers will work on a different seasonal, pipeline or other infrastructure project this year. And I've talked to some of the unions about that, about sort of who moves between jobs. And I think that they're broadly in agreement with me on that one as far as Western Pennsylvania goes. The other one, I do anticipate a lot more rollout of the vaccine. It's up about 60% since Biden was inaugurated, nowhere near good enough yet. And these storms have slowed it down, but they're continuing to up the amounts that are coming out every week.
Yeah, that follows up to Bernard's question. Wants to know, is there more of a national plan for a vaccine rollout?
There is. And what I'm told is that when this team had arrived in office in January, there really wasn't much of a national plan as far as distribution. The administration had put a lot of resources behind development of the vaccine and deserve credit for that. It was an incredible accomplishment by a lot of people. But what was happening was they were basically just dumping doses on governors and state health departments with very little notice. And so, the PA health department might get notice that, you're going to have 100,000 vaccines arrive tomorrow. Well, as you've probably experienced, if you're trying to, get access to any of those doses, a pharmacy, a hospital, whatever, they need to know how many they're getting advanced to even set up the website or phone number for you to call and how many appointments did they schedule, right? So now the Biden administration has gotten it to 3 weeks notice for all vaccines coming. And our hope is that that will not only make it smoother, but iron out some of these communication problems where, the state is saying, oh, all the second doses are here. And then you read the news the next day that that's not true. I mean, it's inexcusable, it's sloppy, but I think it's going to get better and better with each week.
Excellent. We have a really interesting question here about a shortage of CDL drivers at a crisis level right now. Any way to include training in the apprentice program around CDLs?
Yes. I will have to check on whether that is considered part of the apprenticeship bill that we just did. But I know that there has been a lot of effort at the federal level to increase CDL drivers and training. And I agree with you. I've been hearing about it from people for 2 years. And those people are making a lot of money. I mean, there were people signing with Walmart making $80,000 to $100,000 a year as drivers. So it's a quick training program. It's a great way to get people in. I know that here in Western PA, actually, the United Mine Workers were doing training of laid off miners into CDL with some federal funds. So I'll make sure that we're continuing programs like that.
And so let me just jump in. And so in terms of the tech apprenticeships, are there categories in there that offhand that are eligible?
I believe that what they did was make funds available to sort of categories of tech companies that can then sort of apply with their own customized approaches of like, here's what we would use it for. So it's hard to be real specific about it. But if there's anyone on the call who is part of my district and it would be interested in exploring something like that, contact my office. I mean, we'll help you get an answer from the Department of Labor.
We will. We'll put your link out there real quick. I want to get to one question, then we'll go back into the questions, Jonathan. I want to talk about, President Biden working on immigration reform. Okay, and this is an issue that we think is critical. It's critical to Pittsburgh's economy. It's critical to innovation and entrepreneurship. 42% of the companies that are actually on the NASDAQ were founded by immigrants. They're people who are driving the next generation. Pittsburgh has an incredible background in immigration of people who have come from all over the world. So, Moderna was founded by an immigrant. In terms of jobs, they've founded so much for our economy. And I just want to make sure that this is at the top of the agenda. Do you think that some of President Biden's plan includes components to address this?
Yes, in fact, I know it does. I don't know specifically, which visa programs he wants to increase by which amounts, but that's being discussed a lot in the news right now, and they're clearly looking at the issue. I know one thing that has affected the tech community a lot is the country caps on certain visas, and so you have a lot of really exciting entrepreneurs and inventors coming from India, for example, that run into a cap. When you don't end up with as much from another country. So that's part of what is under review. I think his initial rollout has a lot to do with the people that are freezing in tents on the Mexican border right now and trying to get families reunited. But this part of it is definitely under discussion as well.
Yeah, I just can't make that point enough that that's so important for Western Pennsylvania and the area that you represent. So thank you for that. Let's go back, Jonathan. Let's grab some of these questions.
Absolutely. I kind of aggregated some of these so we can kind of knock some of these out in some chunks, Congressman. So really, maybe talk more about the idea of building more infrastructure in the country. Lots of concerns around improving our crumbling infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to do. We almost can't lose by just doing a healthy size infrastructure bill. I serve on the infrastructure committee in Congress, and what we believe is that after this COVID rescue plan is done, the Biden administration's second major legislative push of this first term is going to be essentially an infrastructure, jobs, climate type of bill. couple of unknowns about that right now that will affect how it turns out. You've probably, if you're following this, you've seen that the COVID package was being done basically on partisan lines using a thing in the Senate called budget reconciliation, which allows you to pass it with 51 votes instead of 60. You can only use that tool twice in a congressional term for whatever reason. That's what the rules say. So at the outset, we don't know whether an infrastructure, jobs, climate type of bill would also end up going along those lines, or if it would go along more traditional bipartisan lines. My hope is for the bipartisan approach. I think there's nothing about infrastructure that should be partisan. What could potentially be a flashpoint, though, is the cost. A number of Republicans are finding their fiscal conservative roots again after kind of abandoning them under Trump and objecting to what we're spending on COVID and everything else. So that's going to be the political dynamic. The contents of the bill, I think, it's going to have a lot to do with surface transportation, so roads and bridges, rural broadband, and even increasing broadband access within cities, going to be a huge component. There's some of that in the COVID relief bill, but that's mostly has to do with like getting hotspots to kids that need it. This more would have to do with laying more fiber or getting more 5G infrastructure out there. Climate pieces that you would see would be like major investment in electric vehicles. So the chairman of our committee, for example, wants to replace almost the entire fleet of the U.S. Postal Service with electric vehicles, delivery trucks, that kind of thing. You would see more sort of energy related infrastructure. This issue in Texas kind of reveals how our aging electrical grid needs to be updated. More money for things like public transit that also has a positive climate effect, electric buses in cities, that kind of thing. So those are a few elements. Happy to answer more advanced questions about that if you guys want.
Absolutely. So John Barnes is here. Thanks you for your support of everything around Neighborhood 91 and wants to know more about the importance of this to your district. We think Neighborhood 91 is such a transformative thing with additive manufacturing.
Thanks, John. Yeah, one of the most important things happening in my district. So it's for those who don't know, it's at the airport. They use some of the free land out there to try to create an advanced manufacturing hub focused specifically on metals and 3D printing of metals, a lot of aviation parts, I believe. So it's everything we're talking about, right? It's job creation. It's a greener type of technology. It's advanced. It relies on a more educated and trained workforce, and it will help inject a little bit of life into that corridor, Pittsburgh as a whole. I think there's a strong case to be made that we could be the capital of advanced manufacturing, at least as related to metals, just given our history and the intellectual resources we have and the investment they've made at the airport. And so, I represent the airport. I do everything I can to get sort of funding for them. And we're exploring along with John, some different grant programs and opportunities that would just help keep the investment going there. They've done such a great job attracting lab tech and other tenants to get the thing started.
So that's great. I just want to articulate that at the Tech Council, we really care as well. I mean, for so many market sectors, electric vehicles. And, we're forming an EV coalition to address the downstream opportunities as well as the upstream opportunities of attracting companies there. So anything going on at the federal level that you want to talk about?
Sure. We do things like tax credits, for example. But I think something like what I mentioned of, making a massive investment in the Postal Service's ability to do electric vehicles, or even, using defense spending for that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kind of investments that can move an entire industry forward. Those are the kind of investments that the U.S. made in aviation in its earlier days that then allowed it to jump into the civilian sector and energy. And there's, the internet. There's so many examples like that. So we're looking at things like that. Another thing that comes up a lot on another committee I'm on, the Science, Space and Technology Committee,
Mm-hmm.
is availability and access to rare earth minerals. These electric batteries require some very, very specific minerals like cobalt that only exist in certain parts of the world. China has unfortunately seized control of a lot of that process, and we need to figure out, if we sort of can't get them the traditional route, at least in the quantities large enough, how would we get them, including from here in the United States? There's a lot of belief that given a country as big as ours, if we look in the right places in an efficient manner, we can probably extract a lot of this stuff ourselves. So that work is already happening at some of our national labs. Actually, a lot of people don't know we have a national lab here in South Park in the house. Probably don't know, but they're doing that work with respect to coal, trying to extract some of this stuff from coal. So that's a big part of it too.
Well, so the good news is about EVs is that we're actually able to leverage our assets in terms of natural gas. And so we can use that right here in southwestern Pennsylvania to build our assets with all the partners that we have here, all the big companies, Covestra, US Steel, et cetera. So it sort of is a great way of keeping the economy even stronger and opportunity.
Yeah, and even the plastics sector coming out of the Shell cracker plant, people don't always think of this connection, but that material, the polyethylene that they're going to be manufacturing there, that actually helps go to lightweight vehicles like electric vehicles to make them efficient enough to run on electric power. And so that's actually an area where we might be able to contribute.
Yeah,
a lot of people think of Shell as a very dirty, project, but it has kind of some clean outputs.
So there's a couple of more questions, Jonathan. People are asking about the heroin and opioid epidemic.
Let's switch gears to that because we have not covered that. I know that's a passion of the congressman. Wants to know, can you speak more about your work to combat the heroin and opioid epidemic?
Absolutely. My background was more in the law enforcement side of it, which is ongoing. And, increasingly the epidemic has really become the fentanyl epidemic. And so a big part of that fentanyl really comes from labs in China, sometimes sent to Mexico and smuggled into the US. And so we're always looking for ways to increase law enforcement's ability to detect some of that stuff coming from China. Very difficult. And now using diplomatic means to try to force the Chinese to crack down on it themselves. I mean, it's been said that if you write a semi-critical political cartoon in China, an agent of the state is going to be at your door 15 minutes later, yet they claim they don't know where these illicit fentanyl labs is. But really where the money is to be made is on kind of demand, the treatment side. And there, what seems to be the biggest issue is continuing to try to expand access to healthcare for the people that are most at risk, and particularly mental health care. So we see time and again that it's people that lost their job, went through a domestic situation, whatever the case may be, that end up falling into painkillers and or opioids illegally. And you get a small window of time where someone might encourage them to seek substance abuse treatment. And if they're not covered, if they show up and they can't get access because they don't have the right insurance and there's a million forms they have to fill out and all that stuff, you may lose them for good. And so continuing to do things like Biden is doing with reopening the Obamacare exchanges, rebuilding the community of kind of recruiters and explainers out there who help get people signed up for Obamacare, that actually has a huge effect on the opioid problem. And we've done a lot too, by the way, just to regulate like prescription opioids and building the databases so we can no longer get as many as you used to, but that's ongoing as well.
There's one more question related to, this one's related to cannabis.
Sure. Yeah, I've gotten a lot of questions about cannabis.
Yeah. Update your position on changing the Class 1 drug for cannabis and legalization of cannabis, which is being done in a large number of states.
Yeah, so given my background, the way I look at this is marijuana was in Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, where the sort of most dangerous drugs belong. That should no longer be the case. Marijuana has no place in Schedule 1. It hasn't for a long time. And we just voluntarily wouldn't prosecute marijuana cases when I was in office because it doesn't have the same criminal value that people thought it had. A recent proposal in Congress was just to take marijuana totally out of the Controlled Substances Act altogether, which would just be an unusual approach because like even prescription drugs are in the Controlled Substances Act. You can still get them, but there is a controlled process for how you get them, namely a prescription, all the checks that go with that. So my personal position is at the federal level, we should remove marijuana from Schedule 1, move it down the schedule, create a safe way for people to get it for medical purposes. And then as states continue to experiment, and cities, by the way, with decriminalization and recreational schemes, let's see how that goes. And there may come a day where the federal government wants to adopt that too. But I think this is an area where we can use slightly different federal and state approaches to try to keep people safe, and get access to the people that need it for medicine quickly and effectively.
So Jonathan, I know we're coming up. We've spent more than 30 minutes with him, and I want to be sensitive to the congressman's time. But Congressman, there's lots of questions that are out here. And I
have
think
time if you guys want to stay on. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Keep going. Jonathan.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's we scroll up the line here. This is from Drew Fields. Following up on Audrey's earlier question, says we have a great nonprofit tech organization started by 2 immigrants called 412 Food Rescue. It's scaling nationally as an app called Food Rescue Hero. Is there an appetite in Congress to provide tax incentives or other incentives for entities to support tech for good organizations like 412 Food Rescue?
That's a great question. And I think I would have to look into it. I mean, I would argue that 501c3 status is the ultimate tax incentive because we're paying taxes. But yeah, as to specific technology that you could acquire, we can certainly look at that. And I think they would be eligible for things like PPP during the pandemic that might help them as well.
Very cool. And a question from Matt Rosenberger. Do you know if the Manufacturing USA Institutes will be supported or utilized as a tool to help drive tech adoption and workforce support?
Yes, thank you for asking about that, because to me, those are like one of the hidden gems of the federal government created after 2008. And one of my real ambitions is I would like to see more investment in those in Western Pennsylvania. So for those who don't know, there's, I don't know, you could probably correct me, but a dozen or so of these manufacturing institutes around the country created after 2008, designed to fuse the intellectual resources of universities with the know-how of companies and materials experts to sort of figure out the next generation of manufacturing. The problem, as I see it, is if you look at a rival country like Germany, which has done a really good job preserving its manufacturing base, they have like 70 of these things in a country the size of Texas. We have like 12 in a country the whole size of the United States. We need more. We need to be inviting more people in. CMU participates in one now related to advanced robotics, especially for the defense sector. But maybe the direction that something like Neighborhood 91 is heading, we could try to expand access to those for this area.
Great. And I think we have one more question that clears out our queue for today. And thank you so much for taking the extra time to talk to our crowd today. From basically, can you address the vaccine and not being allowed to go to other, I guess, counties to get the vaccine?
Yeah, was that counties or countries?
Or maybe countries, possibly.
I saw that one too, and it wasn't clear to me.
Yeah.
It does say counties.
I think you go for other counties to get to. We know we've had people in our own office go to other.
She wrote back. Renee wrote back.
And then Renee reiterated county. So I guess we would have to talk through your specific case, because I am also aware of people going to other counties. I don't know. Oh,
that was her example. She was stopped.
So that may have been specific to the provider that you were dealing with, because I know that other people doing it through their insurer have actually been sent to other counties based on where the availability was. So I don't know who the provider was in your case, or maybe they've changed the rules. One of the unfortunate things has been that since the supply is fluctuating so much, the providers have had to continually adjust the number of appointments, what's available, who it's available to, kind of in real time, which is the most frustrating thing ever for normal people. I get it. Like, you're being told you have an appointment, then you don't. Here you have a second dose guaranteed, then you don't. A lot of this has to do with the storm supply chain issues, but then I also think the communication at the state level has been lacking in clarity and certainty. As the availability of the vaccine improves, like we said, it's up 60% already in the last month. A lot of that will fall away because there will be more for everybody. But we're going to be in a rocky period for a few more weeks as that happens. So I'm sorry that that's happening to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like they changed the rules after she got there. I'm sorry about that, Renee. So let's just end on this note. Last year, and I think it was during COVID, you issued a congressional app and a challenge to encourage students from your district to learn and adopt coding skills. What was that about? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is sponsored by a national foundation, just to give kids a reason to get into coding, inventing apps. So we participated, and you basically invite, I think, middle schoolers and high schoolers from throughout the district to make submissions, and a number of people, including probably a few people on this call, took part as judges to help us figure out who's the best. And there was a student from Fox Chapel High School. You know, very painful thing for me being a Central Catholic alum, and we used to battle.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Fox Chapel came out on top on this one. Invented an app that helped people figure out if they needed to get a COVID test based on who they had been exposed to. So it was very impressive. And I think it's just a great reason to get kids doing something a little bit outside the normal curriculum.
Listen, I want to thank you so much for being with us. People really appreciate hearing from you. Thank you for being accessible. Thank you for representing us. Lots of issues to address, lots of matters to be resolved. So my hat's off to you. I want you to stay safe, and we will stay connected to you and your team. Really appreciate the work that you're doing for us. But before we end, Jonathan has an announcement and is going to talk about Monday.
Absolutely. So everyone has to tune in to Business as Usual Monday in the entire week, because we are partnering with Workscape and Knoll for a home office makeover. We've been sitting in cardboard boxes propping up our laptops, achy backs from bad chairs. Well, one lucky Business as Usual participant will be selected, but you got to submit a picture of your awful home office setup. So we're gonna have more details on that to submit your pictures, but be here for it next week, because you're gonna have to be in attendance in order to win the setup. Good stuff.
On Monday, Jonathan.
And then on Monday, we have Camille Scantley stopping by to talk about Project Greenwood, really important project going on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great project. Awesome.
Good
Well,
stuff.
All right, see you, everybody. Thank you for having me again.
Can't thank you enough. Thank you. Stay safe, everyone. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us.